Welcome back to 22 Minutes in Lending. I'm your host, Vince Passione, and today I'm excited to welcome Randy Salser, the new president and CEO of NACUSO. With over 25 years of leadership experience, Randy is perhaps most well known for his time as president of NAFCU Services prior to the merger with CUNA. Today we'll talk about his new role and his vision for where the credit union industry is heading. Randy, welcome to the podcast. It's always great to see you.
Vince, always great seeing you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, listen, new role, right? President and CEO of the National Association of Credit Union Services Organization, big mouthful. Now I know what we call it in NACUSO. But tell us about the journey to this point, right? Most of your time you spent at NAFCU. We've sort of discussed, we've certainly had podcasts both on both sides when you're at NAFCU, but love to hear the journey.
Sure, of course. So my dad was in the Marine Corps. So he was in the Marine Corps for 20 years. So we bounced around quite a bit as a kid. Mainly Quantico, Camp Lejeune, the military bases on the East Coast. And then when I was 12, he retired to Central Florida, Ocala, Florida. I thought I was going to go do 20 in the Marine Corps, just like my dad. And he quickly let that be known that I had some opportunities to go play sports in college, play football in college. And he was not interested in having any discussion about the Marine Corps when I could actually go to college. So we compromised and I went to college. So went out there and then came back to Florida and went to grad school. And after grad school, moved to Sarasota and was going to do an internship at Arthur Andersen, which is where the world headquarters were, which kind of shows you my age. But that's where I met Dan Berger years ago, 20, 30 years ago, 25 years ago. Yeah. And so when he took over as CEO at NAFCU, called me and said, "Hey, I'd like for you to come up and look at this." And I was honest with Dan and said, I don't know much about credit unions, and I certainly don't know much about nonprofits. And so came up and interviewed and thankfully got the role. Learned about credit unions, fell in love with credit unions, and spent a large portion of my career helping credit unions grow and compete and stay connected, through NAFCU and now with NACUSO. Always fascinated with how credit unions share information and collaborate. So pretty natural fit at NACUSO.
That's great. No, great. So what position did you play?
Defensive end. Yeah. I was,
and was this a Division One? What
like NAIA, so smaller college, out in Kansas, Atchison, Kansas. So if you remember the early days of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, that was the intersection of it. Yeah, wonderful time though in my life.
I learned something new. I didn't realize you and Dan went back so far. That's amazing. That's an interesting partnership and a long one, a long tenure one. Let's talk about the next chapter in your life, right? New role you're in at NACUSO. So what attracted you to it? And then when I think about, and I've had the opportunity and the privilege to be at the NACUSO meetings, so and we're a member of it, but A, what attracted you to it? And then B, when you think about, boy, this is the biggest challenge I face and the one I'm so excited about with NACUSO, what is it?
Sure. So I've known, Jack Antonini and Guy Messick for years. I mean, for every year that I was at NAFCU, we met with them and talked to them and strategized and shared ideas and collaborated. So I was always fond of NACUSO. And ironically, what's funny is I called a friend / mentor of mine and who's was at MasterCard for many, many years. And when this role opened, I said, "Man, you should probably do this. NACUSO is a great organization, maybe needs a little bit of course correction, but they're in a great spot. You should do this." And he kind of laughed and said, you should do this. And that literally struck, and we talked and here we are. What's exciting is that the collaborative nature of what happens in credit unions, even when I was talking earlier about I'm amazed at how much credit unions share with each other and are willing to open up any of their ideas with each other. I came from the property and casualty insurance world, and we did not do that. That's not necessarily in our DNA. So with all credit unions navigating all this competitive pressures and all of the speed of fintechs and the speed of change around, NACUSO can be right at the center of some of that dialogue in that ecosystem where fintechs, CUSOs, credit unions can talk and strategize and share with each other. So I felt like it was such a great opportunity to be a part of something that has such a strong legacy going back now 40 years.
No, well, you touched on something I was going to get to later, but I want to get to it now because we talk about that intersection of fintechs and certainly, right, the changes that have happened in the last, and you and I have experienced it together in the last 5 years,
Oh
which
yeah,
is not that long in credit unions embracing new technology, using the CUSO structure to make investments, actually creating investment vehicles right through the CUSO structure, like the Circle Fund. Talk to me about that. I mean, the last time I was at last NACUSO meeting I was at, it was pretty clear. It was probably two NACUSO meetings prior where there was something different about what was being discussed and what was happening at that meeting.
sure. So I think what's interesting is like there's appears to sometimes be this pole, right? There's fintechs on this side, CUSOs on the other. When really it's just a CUSO is just a platform for a structure of a tool in the toolbox, right? So it can be a fintech, fintechs can be a CUSO, CUSOs can be a fintech. I think the reason that fintechs have had such a rise is that financial technologies had such, like you mentioned, such a rapid pace of evolving over the past 5 years. And um, being able to learn and understand how to do it. You know, you've got JP Morgan and Wells and these folks that can spend 150 million a quarter on R&D.
Right.
How do credit unions, even not live in that space, much less compete with some of these larger financial institutions that are, overwhelmingly outspending them. And that CUSO model helps with that. So really more of the education around that fintech space is finding ways to uh, maybe non-traditionally uh, join together to share some of the costs, some of the overhead costs, but also share the intellectual capital at one institution across a few institutions, right? It's very hard to hire a data scientist, but if you can share that cost across two or three organizations from inside a CUSO as you're doing some type of shared services on the back end, for an example, right, as your core or even your accounting function, there's a huge opportunity in that space. And so the educational piece is incredibly important. And that's maybe why I wasn't at that meeting, unfortunately, but that may be why you saw a change in some of the content at the conference.
Okay. Now, give us the overview. Give the overview of your organization, the way you see it, right? And it sounds like, hey, the
Sure.
mission here is truly to help credit unions as members understand the value of a CUSO, different types of CUSOs, how you structure those CUSOs. And there are some very interesting ones, especially recently now the Circle Fund was established,
Sure.
right? We're seeing fintechs
Sure.
create these subsidiaries to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's spread across every tech, right? It's payments. I mean, stable coins soon, right? We've got a ton of these going on.
Sure.
It, am I missing anything as far as the structure goes? I mean, we'll start with your organization and then maybe, hey, there's 1,000 CUSOs. Is there an interesting area that I missed?
Yeah, you're probably right. Like, so what's interesting is there 1,000? Like in the past, that was something that was shared from the NCUA. So we'll work closely with Chairman Hopman to get that data because very smart people, smarter than me for sure, say there's probably closer to 1,500 CUSOs, but kind of what's in the database is about 1,100. And so who really knows? It's the NCUA. And so we're going to try to get some of that shared data. But
Let me
for
stop you.
us,
How does the
sure,
NCUA know? Because they have to, they have
they,
to, they
they
have
do.
to, they have to
They
register.
report.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
they have
report.
to
Okay.
register. Yeah. And that used to be public. And so it's not anymore. And so we'll go back to, and I don't, it's not something that's something that's going to trigger anything. I just think it's an
Mhm.
ask that we need to do and talk to them about it. And look, they have their own struggles, right, with a lot of the cutbacks and things that are going on there. So we just want to ask them about it. But as we talk about NACUSO, it's not just an association, right? It's a community where there's a lot of touch points throughout the year. We'll be strategic about how we spend our member dollars as we advocate on Capitol Hill. We'll do the very surgical type of advocacy work with you know third party vendor oversight, the 1% capital rule, member business lending cap at 1225. And a lot of those are driven behind something you mentioned, like stable coins, right? Because when we were on Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago, all they wanted to talk about was the Genius Act and how stable coins are going to make this huge thing. So we talked about, well, yes, maybe it's a great tool in the toolbox, like we talked about before, but credit unions can't issue stable coins. They can custody them, but CUSOs can issue. But if they do, there's that 1% capital rule that comes into play. So how do they actually have scale? And there are some super innovative CUSOs right now that are working on this initiative to try to provide that scale. But those are the ways that you can make changes on Capitol Hills, kind of tell that story. Because it's tough. It's tough to find room to make any headway on Capitol Hill. So if you can tell some stories around it, it always helps. But we can help on that part. Certainly work with America's credit unions, the leagues, DCUC on the larger stuff, but they're very good at it, right? The tax fight, TCPA, some of the shiny objects that are out there that they're working very hard on every day. That's not us. They're very good at it. We certainly will collaborate with them and participate in letters Capitol Hill that they send up there. We would certainly sign on as an organization, but we'll work on the stuff that's more strategic towards CUSOs and credit unions.
And we're going to go back potentially 1,500 CUSOs. Mm-hmm. And I think, last count is probably what, 4,300 something credit unions. I forgot the exact number. I think it's 43.
That's pretty close. Yeah.
4,369, I think was the last number I saw as a marker. That seems like an awful lot of CUSOs. So is part of your mission to try to clarify and say maybe some of these should be merged together, or it's not? It's really up to the credit union system, and your job is to really educate. I mean, is there any sort of are you trying to keep a fair market kind of thing? Is there some governance that goes on here to say that there's just too many of them? There's too many that are all doing in the old days, check processing, now payment processing, right. Or too many folks all want to launch a stable coin CUSO for payments?
Sure. I think our role is to educate and bring folks together around those issues. And if it is to, do more or less, that's their decision to make, because some of these CUSOs are single owner, some of them are joint, some of them are mini, right? You have the giants, like you mentioned, Cuddle, Origins now, and Valera, but there's quite a few that are just still single owners that do member business lending or shared services. But our job will be to educate around those things, and awareness is huge, because there's still that issue of, oh, I didn't know that we do that, or I didn't know there was a CUSO out there. Even at 1,000, there's still a ton of, and it's not necessarily, it's just not knowing, right? Some of them are very regional. Some of them you just don't think about when you're running your businesses. And so ours is all around messaging and education.
All right. So a month into the job, right? 30, 60, 90-day plan. I'm sure you had that the day you had the idea that you would go do this, but
sure.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah, it hasn't changed much. The first 30 days, listen, learn, reconnect NACUSO to its roots. I called Jack right away. I called Guy Messick, called some of the folks that I've known for years, and they picked up the phone immediately and were all in on helping and doing really anything. So that's really the first 30 days. Listen and learn, talk to as many members as I could, get feedback, good and bad. It's all very helpful for me to get that perspective of our members and longtime members, new members, a lot of it. And so we spent most of the first 30 days on the phone. Over the next 30 and even beyond is tighten the strategy a bit, focus the strategy a little bit on a few projects, not, double digit, triple digit, ideas and initiatives. Modernize a little bit, starting with our website, starting with our education platform portal, and continue to strengthen relationships with leagues, credit unions, CUSOs, regulators on Capitol Hill. That's a big piece over the second 60. And then, the third would be, deliver a clear roadmap to the industry of, hey, here's what we're doing, here's who we are, elevate the value proposition for our members, and kind of launch the next evolution of the Reimagine conference, but one that has more than just the conference, right? Peer groups, regional roundtables, multiple touch points throughout the year, so that our message is consistently out there
Right.
through the 12 months. I mean, you know, even all the way back to NAFCU, when we were doing those things, we had a lot of partners that wanted to do, let's do 4 webinars in the first quarter. And it was more about that sustained touch points and being in the marketplace and having your message out there where the industry is able to consume it at a pace when they want it and they can go to the website and get it anytime, but also not just being there in the first quarter or the third quarter or when you have the time to do it, being that consistent force in the marketplace.
Now, Brandy, I don't think we've ever discussed this when you were at NAFCU, but at NACUSO, it's a year from now. Like, what are the metrics you look at to say, okay, if I'm measuring success, what's success for NACUSO, and how do you measure it?
Yeah, so we have some work to do on rebuilding trust back with our members. And so I'll measure it by our members, and I'll measure it particularly on, if you get super granular, I'll measure it on eyeballs on webinars, webcasts, podcasts, and things that we produce and distribute. But a lot of it will be based in that membership because we do need to re-earn their trust over the next 12 months. And so that'll be the biggest metric of all is,
Hmm.
have the members come back. Not that we've
And
had.
not to probe too deeply, you could pass on this if you
Sure.
want, but you said trust, so that means there must,
Sure.
rebuilding trust. So, what do you think the biggest hurdles you've got to overcome where you said trust was somehow broken? What happened?
I don't know that a lot of the feedback you gave as well, right? Is just focus on what NACUSO is and getting back to those collaborative roots and educating based around that and then delivering that as well, right? Putting the substance behind what our brand is. And so not just focusing on the brand, but focus on the substance that's associated with that brand. And so that's probably the biggest hurdle is finding ways to execute that in a sea of noise, right? You could go to a conference a week in this space and miss half of them, right? Like there's over 150 conferences a year that are very specific to credit unions. So how do you stand out in that field? It's you get very intentional about what you're doing and you tell folks, but then you deliver that same thing, which it's really based around education and telling your story, which is hard for folks to do. Always has been, was hard at NAFCU. It's hard at a lot of places, but again, I think that's the biggest piece is building around the education portal that we can do and let our members tell their story.
So, Randy, we got Reimagine coming up in April. You told us what you expect, but who should attend it?
For us, credit unions, I think would be a huge lift to the audience as well. We have a lot of CUSOs that attend, and a lot of them are credit union employees, but credit union leaders would be a great addition. And there is quite a few of them that come now, but more would be better. Obviously, CUSOs, that we have great support from our CUSO friends, fintechs, leagues, any of the system partners that are interested in learning about, clarity of the mission of CUSOs and connections and partnerships that they can act on immediately. I think those folks would be great to be in attendance at the show.
So, as someone who supports a CUSO, member student lending, somebody who's a partner of the system, someone who attends the CUSO, if I can give you a suggestion to make that happen, that's why I asked the mission, and I think the mission is right, is absolute right. How do you educate people about the value of a CUSO, how to create a CUSO? There are lots of different options. I've seen Brian and Guy; they know how to do this, right? They make it very easy. I've seen Nick Evans there explaining it. However, your point about how do you get the credit unions there and fintechs, a lot of those folks, they're not looking to create a QSO, but they want to become customers
Yeah.
of some of those QSOs. They want to build partnerships. If you could create a part of the agenda to do that, where it's not just, hey, it's a cocktail reception, go find your own way, but some type of like speed dating where, hey, if I'm interested in payments, I can sit with that group of people and talk about it. Because that's the part that I found interesting. There were a couple of breakout sessions, and I looked around the room and I said, these are QSOs selling to other QSOs. It got a little incestuous, just like Money 2020 right after COVID. It was
Yeah.
just a bunch of vendors that showed up to talk to each other. No banks or credit unions were there. But it is a way, as someone who participates, Randy, I would say if you created that some kind of format in the Reimagine conference, where there is this, hey, it's not sales as much, but it's more, hey, let them go out and let credit unions find them and say, I'm interested in a track of payments, or I'm interested in stablecoin, and being able to sit at a table with a bunch of folks who are doing that to really understand which CUSOs are doing it, why they're different, because they want to be a customer of it. They might not want to form one.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And we've talked quite a bit about some of those ideas around some of the lunch and learns and some of these different dynamic sessions where they're off to the side, but very specific and intentional about what they're going to talk about while they're there. And if they want to sit at the table, that's great, but know that this is a insurance related table where folks are probably going to be talking about this. So if you don't want to, don't be surprised if someone's talking about it there. So we are talking about some new ideas to kind of freshen that up, but excellent points.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. So last parting thought, what's one myth or misunderstanding about CUSOs you would wish every credit union would understand?
I guess the one that, and I'm not sure if it's a myth or not, but that CUSOs are risky or complicated. In reality, they're one of the safest and fastest ways to innovate, to create economies of scale, to mitigate risk, to find alternative revenue sources. So for me, that's one that I wish more people knew about the CUSO structure and how beneficial it is and can be as a tool in the toolbox. It's one of the many tools out there. So that's probably one that I'd lean into.
No, it makes sense. And it makes sense. And as a system, I mean, there are very few that you've seen, right?
Yeah.
That I know that have quote unquote out and out failed.
Right.
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 Which speaks to stability. No, that's good. A good parting thought. Listen, Rennie, thank you. It is always a pleasure. I know you're busy, so I appreciate you taking the time out to do this. That's a wrap for our episode of 22 Minutes in Lending. It was a great conversation, Randy. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, share, and join the episode with other folks. And Randy, thank you again. And I found out something new about your football career.
Thanks, Vince. Always great seeing you, pal.
Awesome. Take care, sir.
Thank you for listening to the 22 Minutes in Lending podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You'll find links to any resources mentioned in the show notes. If you're enjoying our show, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review.